Hi and welcome. I hope you had a wonderful 4th of July weekend and your Monday is starting off well. I'm Mary, the librarian at the Claremont Branch Library, and I'm happy to have you joining again for our reading of Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz by L. Frank Baum. We'll be reading chapters 13 and 14 today. On Friday, if you remember, we left our friends. They had been captured by the wooden gargoyles and put into a high treetopped type house where they couldn't get away. But Zeb and Eureka were able to steal some of the wooden wings and put them on Jim and the buggy, and they flew away toward a mountain, toward a rock mountain that they hoped would take them to the surface of the earth. As they flew away, they realized that they were being chased by the gargoyles. And that's where we pick up with in chapter 13. So let's see what happens to our friends today. This is chapter 13, The Den of the Dragonettes. Our friends had a good start and were able to maintain it. For their 8 wings, they could go just as fast as could the gargoyles. All the way to the great rock, the wooden people followed them, and when Jim finally alighted at the mouth of the cavern, the pursuers were still some distance away. "But I'm afraid they'll catch us yet," said Dorothy, greatly excited. "No, we must stop them," declared the wizard. "Quick, Zeb, help me pull off these wooden wings." They tore off the wings, for which they had no further use, and the wizard piled them up in a heap just outside the entrance to the cavern. Then he poured over them all the kerosene oil that was left in his oil can, and lighting a match, set the pile to fire. The flames leapt up at once, and the bonfire began to smoke and roar and crackle, just as the great army of wooden gargoyles arrived. The creatures drew back at once, being filled with fear and horror, for such a dreadful thing as fire they had never before known in all the history of their wooden land. Inside the archway were several doors leading to different rooms built into the mountain, and Zeb and the wizard lifted these wooden doors from their hinges and tossed them all on the flames. "That will prove a barrier for some time to come," said the little man, smiling pleasantly all over his wrinkled face at the success of their stratagem. "Perhaps the flames will set fire to all that miserable wooden country, and if it does the loss will be very small, and the gargoyles will never be missed. But come, my children, let us explore the mountain and discover which way we must go in order to escape from this cavern, which is getting to be almost as hot as a bake-oven." To their disappointment, there was within this mountain no regular flight of steps by means of which they could mount the earth's surface. A sort of inclined tunnel led upward for a way, and they found the floor of it both rough and steep. Then, with a sudden turn, brought them into a narrow gallery where the buggy could not pass. This delayed and bothered them for a while, because they did not wish to leave the buggy behind them. It carried their baggage, and was useful to ride in whenever there were good roads, and since it had accompanied them so far in their travels, they felt it their duty to preserve it. So Zeb and the wizard set to work and took off the wheels and the top, and they put the buggy edgewise, so it would take up the smallest space. In this position they managed, with the aid of the patient cab-horse, to drag the vehicle through the narrow part of the passage. It was not a great distance, fortunately, and when the path had grown broader, they brought the buggy together again, and proceeded more comfortably. But the road was nothing more than a series of rifts or cracks in the mountain, and it went zigzag in every direction, slanting first up, then down, until they were puzzled as to where they were any nearer to the top of the earth than when they had started hours before. "Anyhow," said Dorothy, "we've escaped those awful gurgles, and that's one comfort." "Probably the gargoyles are still busy trying to put out the fire," returned the wizard. "But even if they succeed in doing that, it would be very difficult for them to fly amongst these rocks, so I am sure we need fear them no longer." Once in a while they would come to a deep crack in the floor, which made the way quite dangerous, but there was still enough oil in the lanterns to give them light, and the cracks were not so wide but that they were able to jump over them. Sometimes they had to climb over heaps of loose rock, where Jim could scarcely drag the buggy. At such times Dorothy, Zeb, and the wizard all pushed behind, and lifted the wheels over the roughest places. So they managed, by dint of hard work, to keep going. But the little party was both weary and discouraged when at last, on turning a sharp corner, the wanderers found themselves in a vast cave, arching high over their heads and having a smooth, level floor. The cave was circular in shape, and all around its edge, near to the ground, appeared groups of dull yellow lights, 2 of them always being side by side. These were motionless at first, but soon began to flicker more brightly and to sway slowly side to side, and then up and down. "What sort of place is this?" asked the boy, trying to see more clearly through the gloom. "I cannot imagine, I'm sure," answered the wizard, also peering about. "Whoa!" snarled Eureka, arching her back until her hair stood straight on end. "It's a den of alligators or crocodiles or some other dreadful creatures. Don't you see their terrible eyes?" "Eureka sees better in the dark than we can," whispered Dorothy. "Tell us, dear, what do the creatures look like?" she asked, addressing her pet. "I simply can't describe 'em," answered the kitten, shuddering. "Their eyes are like pie plates, and their mouths like coal scuttles, but their bodies don't seem very big." "Where are they?" inquired the girl. "They are in little pockets all around the edge of this cavern. Oh, Dorothy, you can't imagine what horrid things they are. They're uglier than the gargoyles." "Tut, tut! Be careful how you criticize your neighbors," spoke a rasping voice nearby. "As a matter of fact, you are rather ugly-looking creatures yourselves, and I'm sure Mother has often told us we are the loveliest and prettiest things in all the world." Hearing these words, our friends turned in the direction of the sound, and the wizard held his lanterns so that their light would flood one of the little pockets in the rock. "Why, it's a dragon!" he exclaimed. "No," answered one of the owner of the big yellow eyes, which were blinking at them so steadily. "You're wrong about that. We hope to grow to be dragons some day, but just now we're only dragonettes." "What's that?" asked Dorothy, gazing fearfully at the great scaly head, the yawning mouth, and the big eyes. "Young dragons, of course. But we are not allowed to call ourselves real dragons until we get our full growth," was the reply. "The big dragons are very proud and don't think children amount to much. But Mother says that someday we will all be very powerful and important." "Where is your mother?" asked the wizard anxiously, looking around. "She has gone up to the top of the earth to hunt for our dinner. If she has good luck, she will bring us an elephant, or a brace of rhinoceros, or perhaps a few dozen people to stay our hunger." "Oh, are you hungry?" inquired Dorothy, drawing back. "Very," said the dragonette, snapping its jaws. And do you eat people?" "To be sure, when we can get them. But they've been very scarce for a few years, and we usually have to be content with elephants or buffaloes," answered the creature in a regretful tone. "How old are you?" inquired Zeb, who stared at the yellow eyes, as if fascinated. "Quite young, I grieve to say, and all of my brothers and sisters that you see here are practically my own age. If I remember rightly, we are 66 years old the day before yesterday." "But that isn't young!" cried Dorothy in amazement. "No?" drawled the dragonette. "It seems very young to me." "How old is your mother?" asked the girl. "Mother's about 2,000 years old. She carelessly lost track of her age a few years ago, and skipped several hundreds. She's a little fussy, you know, and afraid of growing old, being a widow and still in her prime." "I should think she would be," agreed Dorothy. Then, after a moment's thought, she asked, "Are we friends or enemies? I mean, will you be good to us, or do you intend to eat us?" "As for that, we dragonettes would love to eat you, my child. But unfortunately, Mother has tied all our tails around the rocks at the back of our individual caves, so that we cannot crawl out to get you. If you choose to come nearer, we will make a mouthful of you in a wink, but unless you do, you will remain quite safe." There was a regretful accent in the creature's voice, and at the words all the other dragonettes sighed dismally. Dorothy felt relieved. Presently she asked, Why did your mother tie your tails?" "Oh, she is sometimes gone for several weeks on her hunting trips, and if we were not tied, we would crawl all over the mountain and fight with each other and get into a lot of mischief. Mother usually knows what she is about, but she made a mistake this time, for you are sure to escape us unless you come too near, and you probably won't do that." "No, indeed," said the little girl. "We don't wish to be eaten by awful beasts." "Permit me to say," returned the dragonette, "that you are rather impolite to call us names, knowing that we cannot resent your insults. We consider ourselves very beautiful in appearance, for Mother has told us so, and she knows. And we are of an excellent family, and I have a pedigree that I challenge any human to equal, as it extends back about 20,000 years, to the time of the famous green dragon of Atlantis, who lived in a time when humans had not yet been created. Can you match that pedigree, little girl?" "Well," said Dorothy, "I was born on a farm in Kansas, and I guess that's being just as spectable and haughty as living in a cave with your tail tied to a rock. If it isn't, I'll have to stand it, that's all." "Tastes differ," murmured the dragonette, slowly drooping its scaly eyelids over its yellow eyes, until they looked like half-moons. Being reassured by the fact that the creatures could not crawl out of their rock pockets, the children and the wizard now took time to examine them more closely. The heads of the dragonettes were as big as barrels and covered with hard, greenish scales that glittered brightly under the light of the lanterns. Their front legs, which grew just back of their heads, were also strong and big, but their bodies were smaller around than their heads and dwindled away in a long line until their tails were slim as shoestring. Dorothy thought if it had taken them 66 years to grow this size, that it would be fully 100 years or more before they could hope to call themselves dragons, and that seemed a good while to wait to grow up. "It occurs to me," said the wizard, "that we ought to get out of this place before the mother dragon comes back." "Don't hurry," called one of the dragonettes. "Mother will be glad to meet you, I'm sure." "You may be right," replied the wizard, "but we're a little particular about associating with strangers. Will you kindly tell us which way your mother went to get on the top of the earth?" "That's not a fair question to ask us," declared another dragonette, "for if we tell you truly, you might escape us altogether, and if we told you an untruth, we would be naughty and deserve to be punished." "Then," decided Dorothy, "we must find our way out the best we can." They circled all around the cavern, keeping a good distance away from the blinking yellow eyes of the dragonettes, and presently discovered that there were 2 paths leading from the opposite wall to the place where they had entered. They selected one of these at a venture and hurried along it as fast as they could go, for they had no idea whether the mother dragon would be coming back, and were very anxious not to make her acquaintance. Chapter 14. Ozma Uses the Magic Belt. For a considerable distance, the way led straight upward in a gentle incline, and the wanderers made such good progress that they grew hopeful and eager, thinking that they might see sunshine at any minute. But at length they came unexpectedly upon a huge rock that shut off the passage and blocked them from proceeding a single step further. This rock was separated from the rest of the mountain, and was in motion, turning slowly around and around, as if upon a pivot. When first they came to it, there was a solid wall before them, but presently it revolved until there was an exposed, wide, smooth path across it to the other side. This appeared so unexpectedly that they were unprepared to take advantage of it at first, and allowed the rocky wall to swing around again before they had decided to pass over. But they knew now that there was a means of escape, and so waited patiently until the path appeared for a second time. The children and the wizard rushed across the moving rock and sprang into the passage beyond, landing safely, though a little out of breath. Jim the cab horse came last, and the rocky wall almost caught him, for just as he leaped to the floor of the further passage, the wall swung across it, and a loose stone that the buggy wheels knocked against fell into the narrow crack where the rock turned, and became wedged there. They heard a crunching, grinding sound, a loud snap, and the turntable came to a stop, with its broadest surface shutting off the path from which they had come. "Never mind," said Zeb. "We don't want to go back anyhow." "I'm not so sure of that," returned Dorothy. "The mother dragon may still come down here and catch us." "It's possible," agreed the wizard, "if this proves to be the path she usually takes. But I have been examining this tunnel, and I do not see any signs of so large a beast having passed through it." "Then we're all right," said the girl. "For if the dragon went the other way, she can't possibly get to us now." "Of course not, my dear. But there is another thing to consider. The mother dragon probably knows the road to the earth's surface, and if she went the other way, then we have come the wrong way," said the wizard thoughtfully. "Dear me!" cried Dorothy. "That would be unlucky, wouldn't it?" "Very. Unless this passage also leads to the top of the earth," said Zeb. "For my part, if we manage to get out of here, I'll be glad it isn't the way the dragon goes." "So will I," returned Dorothy. "It's enough to have your pedigree flung in your face by those saucy dragonettes. No one knows what the mother might do." They now moved on, creeping slowly up another steep incline. The lanterns were beginning to grow dim, and the wizard poured the remaining oil from one into the other, so that the one light would last longer. But their journey was almost over, for in a short time they reached a small cave from which there was no further outlet. They did not realize their ill fortune at first, for their hearts were gladdened by the sight of a ray of sunshine coming through a small crack in the cave roof far overhead. That meant that their world, the real world, was not very far away, and that the succession of perilous adventures they had encountered had at last brought them near the earth's surface, which meant home to them. But when the adventurers looked more carefully around, they discovered that they were in a strong prison from which there was no hope of escape. "But we're almost to Earth again," cried Dorothy, "for there is the sun, the most beautiful sun that shines," and she pointed eagerly at the crack in the distant roof. "Almost on the earth isn't being there," said the kitten in a discontented tone. "It wouldn't be possible for even me to get up to that crack, or through it if I got there." "It appears that the path ends here," announced the wizard gloomily. "And there is no way to go back," added Zeb, with a low whistle of perplexity. "I was sure it would come to this in the end," remarked the old cab-horse. "Folks don't fall into the middle of the earth and then get back again to tell of their adventures. Not in real life. And the whole thing has been unnatural, because the cat and I are both able to talk your language, and to understand the words you say." "And so can the 9 tiny piglets," added Eureka. "Don't forget them, for I may have to eat them after all." "I've heard animals talk before," said Dorothy, "and no harm came of it." "Were you ever shut up in a cave before, far under the earth, with no way of getting out?" inquired the horse seriously. "No," answered Dorothy. "But don't you lose heart, Jim, for I'm sure this isn't the end of our story, by any means." The reference to the piglets reminded the wizard that his pets had not enjoyed much exercise lately, and must be tired of their prison in his pocket. So he sat down upon the floor of the cave, brought out the piglets one by one, and allowed them to run around as much as they pleased. "My dears," he said to them, "I'm afraid I've got you into a lot of trouble, and that you will never again be able to leave this gloomy cave." "What's wrong?" asked a piglet. "We've been in the dark quite a while, and you may as well explain what has happened." The wizard told them of the misfortune that had overtaken the wanderers. "Well," said another piglet, "you are a wizard, are you not?" "I am," replied the little man. "Then you can do a few whizzes and get us out of this hole," declared the tiny one, with much confidence. "I could, if I happened to be a real wizard," returned the master sadly. "But I'm not, my piggy-wees. I'm a humbug wizard." "Nonsense!" cried several of the piglets together. "You can ask Dorothy," said the little man in an injured tone. "It's true enough," returned the girl earnestly. "Our friend Oz is merely a humbug wizard, for he once proved it to me. He can do several very wonderful things, if he knows how. But he can't whiz a single thing if he hasn't the tools and machinery to work with." "Thank you, my dear, for doing me justice," responded the wizard gratefully. To be accused of being a real wizard, when I'm not, is a slander I will not tamely submit to. But I am one of the greatest humbug wizards that ever lived, and you will realize this when we have all starved together, and our bones are scattered over the floor of this lonely cave." "I don't believe we'll realize anything when it comes to that," remarked Dorothy, who had been deep in thought. "But I'm not going to scatter my bones just yet, because I need them, and you probably need yours too." "We are helpless to escape," sighed the wizard. "We may be helpless," answered Dorothy, smiling at him, "but there are others who can do more than we can. Cheer up, friends. I'm sure Ozma will help us." "Ozma!" exclaimed the wizard. "Who is Ozma?" "The girl that rules the marvelous land of Oz," was the reply. "She's a friend of mine, for I met her in the land of Ev not long ago, and went with her to Oz." "For the second time?" asked the wizard with great interest. "Yes. The first time I went to Oz I found you there, ruling the Emerald City. After you went up in a balloon and escaped us, I got back to Kansas by means of a pair of magical silver shoes." "I remember those shoes," said the little man, nodding. "They once belonged to the Wicked Witch. Have you them here with you?" "No, I lost them somewhere in the air," explained the child. "But the second time I went to the land of Oz, I owned the Gnome King's magic belt, which is much more powerful than were the silver shoes." "Where is the magic belt?" inquired the wizard, who had listened with great interest. "Ozma has it, for its powers won't work in a common, ordinary country like the United States. Anyone in a fairy country, like the land of Oz, can do anything with it, so I left it with my friend the Princess Ozma, who used it to wish me in Australia with Uncle Henry." "And were you?" asked Zeb, astonished at what he heard. "Of course, in just a jiffy. And Ozma has an enchanted picture hanging in her room that shows her the exact scene where any of her friends may be, at any time she chooses. All she has to do is say, 'I wonder what so-and-so is doing,' and at once the picture shows her friend where her friend is and what the friend is doing. That's real magic, Mr. Wizard, isn't it? Well, every day at 4 o'clock, Ozma has promised to look at me in that picture, and if I am in need of help, I am to make her a certain sign, and she will put on the Gnome King's magic belt and wish me to be with her in Oz." "Do you mean that Princess Ozma will see this cave in her enchanted picture, and see all of us here, and what we are doing?" demanded Zeb. "Of course, when it's 4 o'clock," she replied, with a laugh at his startled expression. "And when you make the sign, she will bring you to her in the land of Oz?" continued the boy. "That's it, exactly, by means of the magic belt." "Then," said the wizard, "you will be saved, little Dorothy, and I am very glad of it. The rest of us will die much more cheerfully when we know you have escaped our sad fate." "I won't die cheerfully," protested the kitten. "There's nothing cheerful about dying that I could ever see. Although they say cat has 9 lives, and so must die 9 times. "Have you ever died yet?" inquired the boy. "No, and I'm not anxious to begin," said Eureka. "Don't worry, dear," Dorothy exclaimed. "I'll hold you in my arms and take you with me." "Take us too!" cried the 9 tiny piglets, all in one breath. "Perhaps I can," said Dorothy. "I'll try." "You couldn't manage to hold me in your arms?" asked the cab horse. Dorothy laughed. "I'll do better than that," she promised, "for I can easily save you all, once I myself am in the land of Oz." "How?" they asked. "By using the magic belt. All I need to do is wish you with me, and there you'll be, safe in the royal palace." "Good!" cried Zeb. "I built that palace and the Emerald City, too," remarked the wizard in a thoughtful tone, "and I'd like to see them again, for I was very happy among the Munchkins and the Winkies and Quadlings and Gillikins." "Who are they?" asked the boy. "The 4 nations that inhabit the land of Oz," was the reply. "I wonder if they would treat me nicely if I went there again." "Of course they would," declared Dorothy. "They are still proud of their former wizard, and often speak of you kindly. Do you happen to know whatever happened of the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow?" he inquired. "They live in Oz yet," said the girl, "and are very important people." "And the Cowardly Lion?" "Oh, he lives there too, with his friend the Hungry Tiger. And Billina is there, because she liked the place better than Kansas, and wouldn't go with me to Australia." "I'm afraid I don't know the Hungry Tiger and Billina," said the wizard, shaking his head. "Is Billina a girl?" "No, she's a yellow hen, and a great friend of mine. You're sure to like Billina when you know her," asserted Dorothy. "Your friends sound like a menagerie," said Zeb uneasily. "Couldn't you wish me in some safer place in Oz?" "Don't worry," replied the girl. "You'll just love the folks in Oz when you get acquainted." "What time is it, Mr. Wizard?" The little man looked at his watch, a big silver one that he carried in his vest pocket. "3:30, he said. "Then we must wait for the half an hour," she continued, "but it won't take long after that, to carry us all to the Emerald City." They sat silently thinking for a time. Then Jim suddenly asked, "Are there any horses in Oz?" "Only one," replied Dorothy, "and he's a sawhorse." "A what?" "A sawhorse. Princess Ozma once brought him to life with witch powder, when she was a boy." "Was Ozma once a boy?" asked Zeb wonderingly. "Yes, a wicked witch enchanted her so she could not rule her kingdom. But she's a girl now, and the sweetest, loveliest girl in all the world." "A sawhorse is a thing they saw boards on," remarked Jim with a sniff. "It is when it's not alive," acknowledged the girl. "But this sawhorse can trot as fast as you can, Jim, and he's very wise, too." "Pah! I'll race the miserable wooden donkey any day in the week," cried the cab horse. Dorothy did not reply to that, for she felt that Jim would know more about the sawhorse later on. The time dragged wearily enough to the eager watchers, but finally the wizard announced that 4 o'clock had arrived, and Dorothy caught up the kitten and began to make the signal that had been agreed upon to the far-away, invisible Ozma. "Nothing seems to happen," said Zeb doubtfully. "Oh, we must give Ozma time to put on the magic belt," replied the girl. She had scarcely spoken the words when she suddenly disappeared from the cave, and with her went the kitten. There had been no sound of any kind, and no warning. One moment Dorothy sat beside them with the kitten in her lap, and a moment later the horse, the piglets, the wizard, and the boy were all that remained in the underground prison. "I believe we will soon follow her," announced the wizard in a tone of great relief, "for I know something of the magic of the fairyland that is called the Land of Oz. Let us be ready, for we may be sent for any minute." He put the piglets safely away in his pocket again, and then he and Zeb got into the buggy and sat expectantly on the seat. "Will it hurt?" asked the boy in a voice that trembled a little. "Not at all," replied the wizard. "It will all happen as quick as a wink." And that was the way it did happen. The cab horse gave a nervous start, and Zeb began to rub his eyes to make sure he was not asleep, for they were in the streets of a beautiful emerald green city, bathed in a grateful green light that was especially pleasing to their eyes, and surrounded by merry-faced people in gorgeous green and gold costumes of many extraordinary designs. Before them were the jewel-studded gates of a magnificent palace, and now the gates opened slowly, as if inviting them to enter the courtyard, where the splendid flowers were blooming, and pretty fountains shot their silvery sprays into the air. Zeb shook the reins to rouse the cab horse from his stupor of amazement, for the people were beginning to gather around and stare at the strangers. "Giddy up!" cried the boy, and at the word, Jim slowly trotted into the courtyard and drew the buggy along the jeweled driveway to the great entrance of the royal palace. And that is the end of chapter 14. So join again tomorrow for chapters 15 and 16, where we have finally made it to the Land of Oz and see what it is like when all the friends get reunited and Zeb sees the Land of Oz for the first time. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful day.